Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast where we talk about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world, we talk to people who are making it happen in the tech world and get their stories as we talk through things that made a difference in the tech world. Today's guest in the Sky Lounge, Mike Blake. Hi, Mike. How are you doing? Welcome to the Sky Lounge.
Hey, Todd, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you here. Mike, why don't you give us a little bit of background? Who are you?
Yeah, I feel like we should have that Who song in the background as I do this. But so I'm founder of a company called High Score Strategies. We're a business valuation and strategy consulting firm that helps our clients navigate their multimillion-dollar valuation opportunities and challenges. Although adjacent to the accounting industry, I'm literally the worst accountant you'd ever meet and ever have met. So I don't even do my own taxes. I'm a recovering venture capitalist and investment banker, general rabble-rouser and troublemaker, which is why I fled the country back in July. And I'm talking to you outside of our new home, about 50 miles north of Lisbon, Portugal.
Oh, wow. Very cool. And I'd love seeing you on LinkedIn. You always have the coolest posts and dig out really nerdy information, metrics about business. So I'm really happy to talk to you today. So let's talk about valuing businesses, and it's something that comes up a lot. You know, we always think about M&A transaction. Company A is going to purchase or acquire company B. And what's a fair value? Is that the only time that you would need a valuation, or are there other times that that comes up?
Well, there are lots of reasons to potentially need a valuation. That's one of them. I'll come back to that. But there are compliance reasons you need a valuation, either for tax or financial reporting purposes. There's a segment of people who do what I do that focus mostly on litigation. So they perform a service which is called being an expert witness. And what that means is that in a civil matter, the lawyer's job is to argue who broke the law or who broke the law most. And the expert's job is to tell the court what they think the number ought to be. So people like me do that. I don't do that. I'm not very good at it. And not being very good at expert testimony is a very bad thing to then decide, well, I'm going to do it anyway, because lawyers, their job is to make me look like a jackass in a witness stand. That's how they win cases, right? So I don't do that.
Right.
But I mostly do transactional work. Could be M&A, could be shareholders buying into a company. It could be a partner buyout, could be raising capital, because that's where I live. As I think I mentioned, I'm a recovering venture capitalist and investment banker. So that's kind of my comfort zone.
Yeah, we love talking about venture investing and that whole world. So if you're going to talk to a young founder or a CEO that's on the call, what would you tell them to help them get ready for one of these evaluation cycles? And then this is probably something that is going to happen periodically in the development of the company. What kinds of things make it harder or easier to perform your job to get a fair valuation or get the most favorable valuation that for a particular company?
Yeah. So my job it's sometimes to achieve a favorable valuation. If I'm under certain conditions, I don't necessarily have to be independent, and I can be an advocate for my client. But in other cases, I am supposed to be independent, and it serves my client best to be independent, right? So I have two answers to that question, if I could. Number one, and this may surprise you, is don't be obsessed with valuation. Go build a great company that lots of people want to invest in, and the valuation will often kind of take care of itself. That makes my job easier when there's an active market, and my job is to help my client understand kind of the implications of different term sheets, as opposed to trying to establish value in a vacuum. I can do it. It's harder, and I'm not sure that it's as useful. And then I think the second thing that companies can do to make the valuation process easier is to understand the limits of what valuation can and cannot do. I routinely turn down valuation clients or prospects because the call goes something like this. So the email thread, your Zoom goes something like this, where I've got this startup and I'm talking to one or two investors and we can't agree on valuation. So golly, if I get a gold-plated valuation with a good housekeeping seal of approval, then gosh darn it, they just have to agree to this number.
No.
And I
All
sort of
right.
explain to them,
Yeah.
no. And in fact, you're probably hurting your company because when you do that, you're telling the investors a couple of things and they're all bad. First thing is that you're the kind of person who lawyers up. The second that things don't go your way, you go and try to get somebody else to fight their battles for your battles for you. No investor wants to put money in a company like that. Second, they're going to question your judgment. They're going to say, okay, you're scraping by as it is, and you say how badly you need our money, but you just spent 10 grand, 15 grand getting a valuation done for a guy who isn't going to put money into the company. Now I start to question your managerial judgment because you think about what you could do with that money to write code, develop product, get customers, right?
Mhm.
And so I often talk the client out of it, like, my valuation is not going to help you, and I don't want to be the reason your company fails. I don't want that
Right.
from a reputational standpoint. I don't want that from a conscience standpoint. So understanding what a valuation can do, a valuation can make you a more empowered negotiator because you understand what a reasonable range of value is, and you probably are less likely to go out and try to argue an insane value that the market just simply can't sustain. You're going to waste lots of time until the market educates you. And you'll recognize a good deal, or at least a decent deal, when you see it. Jump on it, take the deal, right? Or if you truly are being sort of lowballed by the marketplace, then my valuation is not going to stop the lowballing. What it might do is give you the confidence to then disengage from those conversations and find another group of investors that's going to offer you fair value for their company because the value thesis is going to be more visible to them.
Got it. And, we talk about like down rounds, if you get ahead of yourself and you take a mega, valuation round of funding and then you don't grow like you did, or there's like an economic downturn, it can
Yeah,
really
well,
hurt
that's
you.
the thing is that investors aren't stupid. If they were stupid, they wouldn't have money to invest, right? I mean, there's only so many trust fund babies that are going to be putting money in. People earn their money by wise investing and being good at their jobs, and those people generally are pretty smart. So, you might get your valuation, but as you said, if you might get that, but then there's going to be down round protection. So there's going to be all kinds of anti-dilution protections out there, which I hate to see because they're a bitch to try to actually quantify the value impact of those things. The math gets really, really messy. So I don't want to see those things either. So, again, it's just about understanding the limitations of what a valuation can or cannot do. It can make you more informed, but it's probably not going to convince somebody to come climb down off their value position.
Do you ever talk to founders or people that are looking at taking around? They might have competing term sheets, and then there's different terms. You talked about anti-dilution being one of those. You ever coach people? That's probably a lot more fun conversation than your company's not worth what you thought it was, right? So
Yeah, it's a
what are
lot.
some of the things that trip up people that are kind of a little bit niche as far as terms of an investment?
Well, it really is that terms. If you haven't been in transactions before, and I'll be the first to admit these transactions are not rocket science, but they're hard if you're in the middle of the transaction and you've never done one before. That's when they get really hard. And you get so fixated on valuation because that's the sexy headline number. That's the number the market wants. That's the number your employees want to see because they've got stock options and They want to see the value of their options going up because of the valuations going up. But understanding where terms intersect with value is often underrated. It's often delayed until the end of the negotiation when you have very little wiggle room. And so helping clients understand, okay, what's the difference between participating preferred and non-participating preferred, or what are the implications of having preferred stock versus a convertible note with a cap, right? And what are the various benefits and pitfalls of doing that? Or, maybe you're going to get your valuation with an all common stock deal, but you're giving up 2 out of 5 board seats. What are the implications of that? And what are the implications of drag along rights, where you might get dragged into a transaction that you don't want? And it's okay to agree to those terms as long as you understand what the financial implications are, right? What's not okay is to agree to those terms and then realize that you left a lot of value on the table because you didn't understand what you were doing.
Yeah, I remember we had a conversation, I think, at some point where you look at, should I take $50 million now just because there's a VC that wants to pump it into me, or should I stay small, take only what I need from somebody who's a little bit more friendly, and then raise it incrementally? And there's nothing wrong with a $20 million exit versus a unicorn exit where you might not make as much money personally. I always thought that was kind of interesting.
On a risk-adjusted basis, what's more likely, right? They're called unicorns for a reason because they're really rare.
Right. Well, so when you get involved with some of these deals, I imagine there's a lot of transactions. Do you ever see, spectacular endings or blow-ups over valuation where people can't come to terms?
Oh, sure. They happen all the time. And I'm much more inclined to encourage a client to walk away from a more conventional M&A deal over valuation than I am inclined to have a startup walk away over valuation. Now, I should preface this or add this caveat. I don't do a lot of work in Silicon Valley, and that market is just different. I don't do a lot of work in 128. Those markets are different. But in the kind of markets where you have mere mortals like Atlanta, you have to, before I tell a client to walk away from a deal, I have to understand that I'm going to take the responsibility for giving the client advice that may result in their company failing, because that next investor may or may not materialize in Atlanta, and that founder may or may not have the capacity to raise that money in Silicon Valley, right? And so this probably sounds odd coming from somebody who's a valuation expert and makes a living performing business valuations for clients. But I as often as I can, I try to get my clients off of valuation being the be all and end all, right? Don't let your company die over valuation. Is the satisfaction that you held out and didn't get a deal done, is that going to give you consolation that day when you send your email or you gather everybody in the conference room or on a Zoom call and say, you're all fired, we're done, right? Is that gonna make you or your employees feel better? I think most of the time the answer is no, right? So it's, they have a thing in football they call situational football, right? It's situational football.
Depends on where you are and what your options are, and what the risk reward is, right?
Time left in the game, right? What great play do you have at that point? So, what I do for a living in valuation is, and one reason, a very legitimate reason people have a problem with what we do, is that we operate in a laboratory where there's something called fair value, and that when you're selling shares in your company, there's an infinite market of potential buyers out there. If you don't like the deal you're getting, you're just going to walk down the street and find another buyer. But we both know that in Atlanta, there is no street. There is no street that you're walking down that you're going to find that other buyer, right? Finding that other investor is possible, and it's easier now than I think it was 10, 15 years ago. But it's not just sort of, oh, well, there are 3 guys waiting in the wings, right? If you have those 3 guys waiting in the wings, great. But the tenor of the deal and the way that you pursue it has to be different depending on what your realistic options are and how much resources, including time, you have to materialize or mobilize those additional options.
So we talk about, what makes a company worth more. We used to joke in the .com era, people get taken out for $1 million an engineer. So I don't think it's like that anymore, right? So I know you've written a lot about patents lately. So are patents worth, what's going on with patents? I got a few myself, and I've kind of ridden that train. And I have kind of evolved my thinking from, wow, this is a really neat thing. You need a patent or two to, well, I don't know. So how do you think about patents right now? Would you tell somebody with $1 million ARR, go get a patent if you can? Or is that going to help your valuation?
So I think one of the things we learn is that not all patents are alike. Okay. And not all patents are applied for equally. Now, what you're referring to, Todd, I think, is the advent of the America Invents Act and the PTAB, the Patent Trade and Something Board. I always forget what the A means. I want to say arbitration, but I don't think that's right. Where you might receive a patent from the U.S. Patent and Trade Office, but thanks to PTAB, there's givesies backsies, where either at the behest of a company or just simply on their own, another body is empowered to effectively take the patent away, or at least neuter it to the extent where the patent loses all of its value, right? And that should be concerning to every inventor that's contemplating obtaining a patent, and should be immensely frustrating to anybody who has a patent, because the patent does not mean what it used to mean and what it says it means. Because, I'm going to get a little finance nerdy on you here, every patent now has a short call, okay? And what that means in English is that the patent's out there, but there's an option for somebody to exercise an option to challenge the patent and in all probability have it validated. So what does that mean? Well, there's still plenty of patents out there that are valid. The pharmaceutical industry simply cannot succeed without viable patents. And for the most part, we're seeing their patents upheld and enforced, with a notable exception being the patents surrounding the CRISPR gene editing mechanism, because there were basically 6 parties that all at the same time had a credible claim on having prior art, and nobody could really decide. And I think for the most part that wound up being settled out. And I learned as much about that or more than I wanted to by reading Walter Isaacson's book, The Miracle Worker, about the development of that whole thing. So patents can have value, but you have to take, I think, much greater care. And frankly, I think where I'm coming down on it is you have to now do the job of the patent examiner for them, right? Because what I've learned is that the typical patent examiner spends around 20 hours determining whether or not they're going to issue that patent. And that includes all the potential back and forth, provisional patent application, request for clarification. And that's fine if you've got a new patent for like a flywheel, right? But you're patenting software, you're patenting artificial intelligence algorithms, you're patenting some sort of stem cell technique. And there's just so much out there. How could a patent examiner possibly cover all of the prior art, right? They just can't. It's not a question of There's not a question of them being competent or not competent, being paid enough, not paid enough. There simply aren't enough patent examiners out there, and there's probably not enough people in the United States qualified to become a patent examiner if we wanted to staff up, right? They'd
Uh-huh.
all have to
Uh-huh.
make $2 million a year. They'd be the highest paid people in the U.S. government to get that Venn diagram of skills and willingness to do it. So I think the key now, and there's starting to be evidence to support this, that you have to invest in lots of prior art research on your own, and you cannot now use reverse citations as a substitute for doing prior art research. There's evidence now that the more prior art citations you have in your patent, the more likely it is to become invalidated.
Hmm.
You have to invest, you have to pay the lawyers the big bucks, and often at bulge bracket firms, which means $800 an hour, to do a thorough prior art search that the patent examiners simply do not have the resources and wherewithal to do, to make that patent as defensive as possible, which means you used to think you were getting in bed for $30,000 maybe to get a patent done.
Yeah.
Add a zero to that if you want the patent to have a
Wow.
reasonable
For a good
chance.
patent.
Yeah, to be a non-junk patent, right? That's what you got to do. And if you're not prepared to do that, then don't pursue the patent. Build an IP strategy around trade secrets.
Wow. Well, and I was always told as a young technical founder, hey, go apply for a patent, get a provisional patent application in very quickly for a couple $100, and then you got a year to figure it out, and then that makes you look good. Like there's a little bit of rigor in your thinking, and somebody's looked at it. I think that's valuable, particularly in a hard technical or deep tech type environment. And then spend, 5-10 grand to get it in. And then, I think your number 25, 30 grand is about the going rate to get a patent for
Yep.
something. Right. And then the game
Yep.
was always, you got to get a patent, you just might have to narrow it down a little bit. And then, so if we have ever narrowing niche patents, then, it's kind of like, what are we doing? Right. That's just, and it kind of goes back to your, if you had that $30,000, $50,000 back, and you spend it on, sales and marketing, and, you're not going to get the patent in for 5 years anyway, right? 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And then, what are you going to, if you're a small, single digit million ARR company, you're not going to spend $1 million to litigate, Google or some big company, coming and infringing on your patent. You like you're saying, it's probably much better to just go like hell and just take the market and become big. But
and that's exactly what we see the market doing, right? Is that with some exceptions, biotech is a notable exception. You cannot operate in that market without patenting. But in a world where it costs $100 million in 10 years to go from molecule to market, spending a few extra $100,000 on patents makes sense, right? You can support that within the construct of the overall budget. But that's why when VCs, the real grown-up VCs, are investing, the thesis is how much market can you grab and achieve market pricing power, not by patents, but having a barrier to entry over branding and network effects.
Mm-hmm. I have thought, so what do you think the lifetime of a typical, venture funded company is, from like, say, angel investment to some kind of exit? Is it, it's got to be not much longer than the 5 years it would take to get a patent anyway.
Well, so the standard view is 5 years. Mm-hmm. And the reason that it's 5 years is because, the way the venture capital business works, typically the life of the fund is 10 years. And after 10 years, time's up, pencils down. Whatever you've got in the portfolio, you've got to liquidate and return the money to limited partners, right? Assuming it takes a couple of years to even start to get deals in the door and done, right? That leaves 8. And so for the back end, you really can't start investing after 6 years, because you need to focus on harvesting those guys, right? So, the way that the funds are set up, if it's true venture capital and not family office money, that's a different animal. But where they have a finite, they have a ticking clock, it's got to be between 5 to 6 years, or contracts start to get violated.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, so since I have been issued a number of patents in the past, and for kind of hard science stuff, and then maybe a little bit for a little squishier stuff along the way.
Yeah.
But people called me and said, "Hey, we've got this legislative action." I think there's a fella, the balloons. We have water balloons, and there's like a gazillion little straws, and the auto like inflates the balloons. So I think the dude who did that, got copied by some international company, this mega company that does this all the time. They just run right over everybody. They went to the PTAB and tried to get him invalidated. And he's literally the 1 in 10,000 that won, because he spent millions of dollars to defend. And then so he's a really rare exception. But we're going to the senators, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better, right? And so if you have to spend early money that would be better suited to do sales and marketing, developing product market fit, it's going to take you 5 years to get it anyway. And even if you get it, it probably get invalidated if anybody really cares, if it's a decent patent. Or worst case, you have to spend millions of dollars to litigate. Then what are we doing? Like, why would anybody do this, right? Just go like hell and get to market.
I mean, look, there's a market out there. There's an alternative asset class for people who invest in lawsuits, right? They back lawsuits, including intellectual property. They're hard to find. They're hard to convince. It's probably harder to get them to back your litigation than it is to get VC to back a deal, right? But that in itself is now its own investment vehicle, which I don't know speaks overly well for the intellectual property protection system.
Yeah. All right, Mike. I know you got some good valuation stories. You ever get involved in anything wacky where people come to you and say, this isn't just revenue, this is like a lot of weird mitigating factors? You got any good stories about interesting valuation deals?
So I got plenty of interesting stories, but the most interesting one, my surefire cocktail party winner, is not a technology company. In fact, it's the lowest tech kind of company you could possibly imagine. They're a light manufacturing company in Georgia. I could mention the name because it's been it's not for 5 years, but I'm not gonna. There's no value in doing that.
Sure.
And they approached me to do a valuation because the company was entering a conservatorship. And a conservatorship is where somebody gets to take care of the company and the assets for the owner because they become in some way incapacitated. In fact, there was just a movement to try to declare the owner of the Houston Texans incapacitated, put that into a conservatorship, but that was withdrawn. And this was the kind of company that was the dirtiest of the dirty company. They made the lowest cost product that was sold to the prison system. Okay.
Ooh.
And it was all done on an all cash basis. There were no financial records to speak of. All of the labor was illegal. In fact, they warned me when I went to do my site visit, make sure to dress down, because if you show up in a suit, somebody's going to shout out Los Federales, and every single one of them is going to be fleeing for their lives and climbing over the fences to get out of there. Okay. And the only discernible financial records we could find was a shoebox full of receipts. They were doing $3 million of business a year. They had not filed a tax return since 1987. They'd managed to stay entirely off the grid. And aside from a shoebox of receipts, we found an IOU of $200,000 to a guy named Nick. I kid you not.
And Nick has a baseball bat, right?
We think Nick is probably the reason the owner became incapacitated. We think that's why there was an unfortunate accident on the shop floor. Mm-hmm. And the reason my valuation was called for was because the owner had two families. He had the current family and the one that was the result of a divorce, and they were both fighting over this company, which of course is throwing off a ton of cash. You can be really profitable if you don't have to pay taxes and you don't have to deal with pesky labor laws or minimum wages. It's really easy to make money, it turns out.
Wow.
And each side was basically threatening to go to the IRS and to go to the authorities and rat out the company if they didn't get what they wanted. So um, I, I I was retained to perform a valuation according to the standard of fair value, which I immediately said was zero, because who on
Yeah.
earth is going to buy this
Yeah.
company with unknown tax liabilities, unknown potential civil and criminal penalties? There's just no market for it. So
Right.
then the lawyer actually got a good chuckle out of it. And we reframed the value to a different standard of value called investment value, which, among other things, what is the value to the current owner? And the current owner already knows that they have these issues out there. They don't care.
Right.
They just want the straight cash, right? And so in reframing it to that standard of value, it turned out the value of the company was worth $3 million. And
Okay.
so using that valuation, then I was able to help them negotiate a settlement between the two factions of the family. And the conservator, who was one of the owner's daughters, was a CPA. She was freaking out because she's like, I'm going to lose my license. I'm going to go to jail. I don't want to be the conservator. I was just sort of named conservator. I don't know why. She was freaking out. To her credit, she somehow got the company to go legit, settled with the IRS. And by the way, it's always better to approach the IRS rather than have them find you.
Oh,
If you
sure.
want to come clean, go to them first. You're going to get a better deal. Their negotiating tenor is going to be much better.
Yeah.
And she did that. My understanding is now they're legit and they're legitimate business, and I think they're paying all their people. And I think for the most part they have legal labor. So there was a happy ending to that, but that was a very interesting assignment.
Wow. You made me think about like FTX, and that whole deal where you're like, there's no records, there's nothing, and like they
Right.
were, just like on a Slack channel or something saying, hey, can I buy a book or, a jet
Yeah.
or
And
whatever.
this guy was paying his labor. This guy was paying his labor in gift cards.
Holy moly. Oh God.
He was like going to
Not sketch
Walmart
at
like
all.
every week, every day. In
Whole,
fact, he was paying his laborers by the day because he didn't know if they were going to show up the next day. They might move to another state or get deported or whatever, right? So he
yeah.
was paying his labor. He was going to, at the end of the day, he'd give them all Walmart or Target gift cards.
It's like those phishing scams, where you get a text message
Yep.
from the CEO. Oh, you got to go. I'm in a meeting.
Oh
You got to get me
yeah.
an Apple
Yep.
iCard,
Yep.
scratch it
Yep.
off and then read it out to me.
Yep.
I gotta have it right now. So, you said you're in Portugal right now. So what's that like? Why did you like? I hear really great things. Like Portugal's a fun place to vacation, and the weather's nice. But you chose to go and you're still working and making a living over there. What was so great about Portugal? Why'd you pick there?
So we wanted to move abroad, and I want to preface this by saying we didn't move because we hate America. We're not one of these people that like an election went the wrong way or the wrong law got passed. Like that's it, we're emigrating. Absolutely not. No,
It wasn't Nick either, right?
it
Just yeah,
wasn't. I know it was no, it wasn't. It wasn't Nick. I gave him the best chance of being repaid. So
yeah,
he should love me. But we just decided that we'd been to Europe many times. My wife had lived in Spain. I lived in Eastern Europe for a number of years, worked there, and we really enjoyed it. And every time we vacationed, we hated coming home. And I couldn't even put my finger on it. It's not like I even think that Europe is quote better than America in any way. It's just it's better. It's better for us. So we started kind of. Europe's a big place, right? There's 35 countries here. Where do you want to go? So we wanted to be in the European Union because we wanted to have that ease of travel. We wanted to be closer to America than farther, because my parents still live in Boston, so I want to be able to get back there in case they need me.
yeah,
Plus, I'm not retired. I'm continuing to work, so I didn't want to be in like I don't know Greece or something where it's going to be a 7 hour time difference. I'm at 5. That's fine for me and perfect, right? So wanted to do that. Portugal checked off a lot of boxes. The people here were great. there's a sneaky little tech sector, particularly in artificial intelligence, that nobody really knows about.
Okay.
Um, I speak French pretty well. Spanish is passable. So picking up Portuguese has been fairly easy for me. So the language wasn't going to be an issue. And it's relatively, at least up until last year, it's now changing. It was relatively easy for us to obtain an immigration visa. So though that checked off a lot of boxes, and the weather here is great. It's dark out now because we're 5 hours ahead. But if I were able to see outside, I'd see palm trees. It's 55 degrees. It rarely rains, even though I got rained on today, but that's unusual. And for us, it's been a great move. We love the challenge of being in a foreign country. We love the challenge of adopting the culture of a new society and adapting to that, and the excitement that comes with that. And for me, because of that, in Atlanta, it's a great place. I'm going to be back there in a month for about a week or so. But I felt like I wasn't being challenged anymore, and being challenged again by living in a foreign country has been for me a spiritual rebirth, an intellectual rebirth, and even a physical rebirth. So for us, it's just been fantastic.
Very cool. I'll have to follow up with you on the AI business. So I do a lot of computer vision and natural language stuff, but I'm also an investor in AI startups. So I think that'd be interesting to see what's going on there in Portugal.
Come over to Portugal. They actually have a place in Lisbon called the Unicorn Factory.
Okay. Yeah, let's do it. That'd be awesome.
Yep.
So, one of the cool things that you did stateside is you had Startup Lounge, right? At a time in Atlanta where there wasn't a lot of movement. There's a lot of activity where people wanted to start companies, but there wasn't a lot of infrastructure. Somehow you got a whole bunch of entrepreneurs of high quality and individual angels, investors in the same room at the same time with very few service providers. So how did you do that? How did you, thank you for doing that. That was, I think, a huge deal for Atlanta and the community. What made you want to do that, I guess? And then, who was the first couple calls that you called?
Yeah. So I didn't do it. A guy named Scott Burkett, who's doing his own startup thing now, but he and I launched that together. And then we had a silent partner by the name of Stacy Schuker, who has her own startup now. It used to be called the Bitter Southerner. Now I think it's called Down Home. Oh, I feel like such a jerk for not remembering this. She's going to tell me. But look up Stacy Schuker and find her business. It's really cool. Charlie Paparelli, who's a longtime investor, doesn't do much investing anymore, but he still is a leader in that community. He was sort of a spiritual leader and mentor for us, and I think gave us a lot of legitimacy. And it was very organic. He and I just started having conversations about, why is Atlanta so dysfunctional? Because we're running into these brilliant people, and the universities here crank out these great technologies. There's plenty of money here, right? Although, more of it's going to real estate than we would like, but that, you can't fix that. Atlanta's a real estate town first, and it will be for a long time. But, why isn't it more of a functional town? And, we sort of ticked off the usual suspects. Back then, Atlanta Tech Village was just a glimmer in David Cummings' eye, right? We were years away from that. And Tech Alpharetta and, a lot of the other, Hypopotamus, a lot of the other organizations that are now leaders, Venture Atlanta didn't exist yet. And we said, what happens is that the networking events scare a lot of the fish away. There's so many people, frankly, like me, and I was and am a service provider, that are just, trying to get business out of, startups and particularly out of investors, that it's like what Yogi Berra said, it's so crowded that nobody goes there anymore. And that's what
Yeah.
happened. These events became so crowded that nobody went there anymore. You go to these ATDC events and tag events and MIT Enterprise Forum and Women in Technology, and I mean, and they were fine, right? But they scared the fish away. So Scott and I decided that we're just gonna host this sort of underground thing. And I thought it was cool. Scott was really the spiritual leader because he was in it. He had his own startup at the time called Incursio that he was doing pretty well with and wound up exiting. And I was kind of along for the ride and kind of along for he was the visionary and I was sort of the practical, what if this happens, what if this happens kind of guy. But I was also a guy who wore a suit that could kind of bring a little bit of ostensible legitimacy to some other stakeholders. So anyway, we said we were going to hold this sort of speakeasy meeting at a Bahama Breeze outside of Alpharetta. And we invited 10, 12 people, something like that. And we thought nothing of it. We thought we'd go and have some laughs and invite people we knew were angel investors, we knew were startups, and just get a few drinks and some appetizers with people and sort of let nature take its course. And then, but very quickly, people heard about this, and people that I had never heard of before, never met. Same thing was, well, Scott knew more people than I did. Started calling and emailing, saying, "Hey, I hear you got this meeting. How do I get in?" And I'm like, "Well, seem like you have a legitimate startup, or you seem to be an investor. Check them out. Here it is. Come on and show up." And the same thing happened to Scott. And the guest list went from 12 to 20 to 30 to 40. And one of us I don't know if it was Scott or me, it was probably Stacy, because she's the smartest of the three of us, said, "You can't just show up at a bar with 50 people."
Yeah, right.
That's not going to go well. They're not, they're not expecting it. They may not have capacity. And we're like, what are we going to do? And I happened to meet a guy named David Covell at a Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce meeting. I almost never went to those things, but I went to one who's by far the most useful contact that I ever got out of one of those meetings. And he has a couple of event facilities called the Pavilion. Let me call him up and see what he might be able to do. I called him and said, "Look, I'm coming to you hat in hand. We just need to have a space. Can you do something for us that's just legal?" Right? It doesn't have to be sort of top flight. It just needs to be legal. Can you do like a cash bar? Everybody can pay for their own drinks and food and stuff. And, David, I never got enough credit for this. And I hope I've given him as much credit as I possibly could. But he said, "You know what? I'll do a cash bar. And how much money can you put together?" And Scott and I looked at each other. It's like, how much can we put in and not buy a fight with our wives? So we looked at each other and said, "Well, we can put in a couple $1,000. And he said, "Okay, give me a couple $1,000. I'll cover the rest. I'll sponsor the event, and we'll hold it at the Pavilion in Dunwoody." And so, we set up a website. We set up a website, startuplounge.com. People started registering, and we wound up with 300 people coming to that event. And we color coded the name tags. So that green meant that you're an investor, blue meant that you were a funding seeker. And at that time, we had a couple of other service providers that we invited on the down low because we wanted them to be sponsors. So we had to show them what they were going to be investing in for the next event. So there were a couple, but not very many. We had over 300, and Scott and I were up until 3, 4 in the morning putting those name tags together, printing them out on our inkjet printer and stuffing the name tags.
Very cool.
And then, we showed up, and then there was a line. There was a line around the block of people just waiting to get in. And we were completely unprepared for that. We had no idea. And David to his credit, put on a first-class event. Somehow we got people in. Susan O'Dwyer from HA&W, now Aprio, she's now retired, volunteered to staff the registration table. So she was checking people in. You're not on the list. And she was also our bouncer. If you weren't on the list, you couldn't get in, that sort of thing. Or here's the last person. And so we had 300 freaking people at that event. We had a good 25 vetted investors, which possibly up until that point was the largest gathering of actual legitimate check writers in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And we did it all for free. We didn't charge a dime. And anytime we had an event since then, we set up a 501c6, and never took any compensation ourselves, just what was needed to keep putting on the events. But that's how it started, and we wound up doing 3 to 4 of those events a year, and they grew and they grew, and I think our biggest event was something like 370 people or something, and it was a fun time. And then mercifully, Atlanta grew up. Venture Atlanta came on the scene, and Sanjay Parekh and his event, I can't remember what it is now. But he did his pitch event that was very effective. Venture Atlanta came on the scene. Startup Chicks, Locust 151, Ed Vicker's outfit, right? And then eventually, a little bit later, David Cummings came along and had his exit, and he established Atlanta Tech Village and Atlanta Technology Ventures. And so they worked us out of a job, thank God, because it was very time consuming. We couldn't.
Yeah.
And, we were never going to make money on them. We were true to our word. We never wanted it to become a money-making exercise. Scott had kids. He needed to pay attention to those. I needed to pay attention to my career. And we sort of, after doing about a dozen of those things, we sort of faded off into the sunset, and we were no longer needed. But it's gratifying that people feel that we were able to make a positive impact. And, I think we did, and I think we got out at the wrong time. I think we got out maybe a year too early rather than a year too late, and didn't try to hang on. It was a graceful. I'd like to think it was a graceful exit, and I like to think that we added some value.
Yeah, well, you're a good man. Thanks for doing that. Hey, Mike, it's all about travel here in the Sky Lounge, and do you got any good airplane stories to tell us?
So, my favorite story is right out of school. In fact, I dropped out of graduate school at Northeastern in Boston to take a job to run a privatization program for USAID and Brown University. And they hired me because they needed a Russian-speaking MBA. And they needed a Russian speaker who was not a native Russian speaker, because a native Russian speaker back then would never be accepted. They'd be considered carpetbaggers. They had to have somebody that spoke with a heavy accent, that made lots of mistakes, but still knew something about business. I hardly knew anything, but they hired me, and I flew over. I stopped off in Germany for a week, and then went to get my flight in Frankfurt, and I missed it because I got lost in the German subway system. I speak many languages. German is not one of them. And even though I was actually still 10 minutes early, that they still, like Germans, they left early. So I was pretty ticked. And I freaked out a little bit because there were no cell phones. This is 1993. There was no way to contact somebody in Belarus in real time. My plane was just going to get there, and they had no idea where I was. The next plane to Minsk was in 2 days. So Lufthansa shoved me on a flight to Moscow, I think mainly to get rid of me. In fact, I'm sure that's what it was, to get rid of me. So they stuck me on a plane to Moscow. I made it to Moscow. I did not have an entry visa for Russia, only Belarus. So I get to the visa station, and I was desperate. I played dirty. I was tired. I was scared. I was frustrated, and I basically blamed it all on the Germans, because I knew the one thing that back then would always play with the Russians was blame it on the Germans, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Germans screwed me just like Hitler did back in 1941, right?
Yeah.
And that was enough that they gave me a visa, and somehow they gave me credit for my incomplete flight so that I could then take an internal flight from Moscow to Minsk. So I
Okay.
transferred over to the domestic airport, and I waited 12 hours for that flight, wondering kind of what was going to happen next. I finally got on that flight on what must have been a million-year-old aircraft. It was a Tupolev 134, a knockoff of our L-1011.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, on sort of ex-Soviet planes, it was like a bus. There were no assigned seats. You got a ticket and you found a seat, and that's where it was. So as the American, they put me on the plane last, and my seat was next to a passed out Russian soldier. He was just completely out, but he was taking half of my seat. Take off. It's 10 at night. Again, there's nobody meeting me at the airport. I'm making this up as I go along, as a 23-year-old speaking broken Russian. On the plane, the guy across from me asked me what time it is, and I didn't realize at the time. I showed him my watch. I couldn't hear that. There's no soundproofing. There was just 80 decibels of jet engine going on behind me. But he saw my watch, and he confirmed his suspicions that I was American. Started having a conversation, and they told me they were smugglers. They smuggled basically bootleg CDs and got boom boxes basically across the border without the tariffs. And we come in for a landing. They say, what are you doing? I said, well, I guess I'm just going to get a hotel. They say, you can't just get a hotel, right? There's a whole process. You can't just walk into a hotel here and get a reservation. There's a whole process by which you have to do that. So you should come home with us. And I thought, well, it's either that or stay in the airport. So I went home with these guys who literally told me they were criminals. They told me they were criminals. And I go home with them, and we feast on sauerkraut and pickled garlic and vodka. And back then I was a total lightweight. So after 2-3 shots, I was gone. I passed out. I woke up, and they're as good as my word. They found the business card of the guy who's supposed to meet me at the airport in my wallet. They called him, and he came and got me. And those guys became very good friends of mine. I still keep in touch with them to this day.
Oh, that's so awesome. Wow.
And if I were in my age now, I never would have done that. That's only because I was 23 and naive or stupid that I ever would have done anything like that.
Wow, that is so cool. Well, Mike, it's been great catching up with you and having you in the Sky Lounge. Where can people find you on the internet if they want to follow up with you?
Yeah, thanks for having me and reliving some of these memories. It was fun. I hope I'm remembering them correctly, especially for startup plans, because I get a lot of credit for it, but it's not an individual effort at all. So I'm not hard to find on LinkedIn. On every social media platform, I'm some form of unbreakable. Scott Burkett's idea, by the way. He came up with that branding for me. And our website is highscorestrategies.com. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We desperately need subscribers, called Your Business Value.
And we'll link to it in the comments below.
Perfect.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mike. Thanks. Bye for now.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.